Hello out there. Hope everybody is doing good. It says that I am live, so I think that I'm live. You guys know this is a very blue collar outfit as far as the equipment and everything else. Brad, the comeback card investor, I'm sure will be on shortly to make fun of everything that's going on here, and that's fine. Guys, thank you very much for joining. I've been really enjoying. I had Devin on last week for a subscriber spotlight where I talk with subscriber, someone that I've kind of met through this channel, another collector that, it's always interesting to hear other people's perspectives and how they're hobbying and so forth. And so I'm really excited to have on Ryan tonight. He's a guy, he's been watching my videos for a little while, but he always writes really thoughtful, detailed comments that I really enjoy. But this guy is a wealth of knowledge with sports cards and collectibles in general. So I thought I've got to have this guy on. So I'm excited to have Ryan on. Before I bring him on, I wanted to, we'll kind of dig into this later, but I'm going to be at the Dallas show on Thursday, and I'm trying to figure out if I should do a lot of like show content or not, or not as much. We're going to do kind of vlog style, and I've never done the vlog thing before. I will have my cameraman with me. I'm bringing, one of my buddies here locally will be there with me. So I'm excited for that. So anyway, I wanted to get your thoughts. If anyone else is also going to be at that Dallas show, it'd be good to catch up too, if possible. So, all right, let me go ahead and bring Ryan on from the background. Ryan, how's it going, buddy?
It's good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm excited for this. So let's kind of just start from the beginning. Well, first off, before we start, let me just say hi quickly to Pittsburgh. What's up, buddy? Michael Ham, good to see you. And David Mercer, good to see you, man. You guys appreciate you always tuning in. All right. So Ryan, how did you get into this crazy sports card hobby world that we operate in these days? What started it off for you?
Okay. So I started I started pretty young when I think I may have been like 5 or 6. I basically 1984. I remember actively collecting cards, and I started. I didn't stop actually until the baseball players' strike of 1994, and I just had it. I was upset with the players and baseball in general, but I still wanted to collect. And probably about like 92 or so, I started dabbling in vintage, and after 94, that's how I went to vintage all the way. But there was like another component to that, and that was it was my education that I got in high school, which and junior high, which I wasn't thrilled about. And yeah, I really didn't get a very good education. But and when I was in the 4th grade, my teacher, she wanted to teach us about math and problem solving skills. So she took us to a baseball card store, which it was conveniently right across the street from the school. And when I was there, all my classmates were looking over like Bo Jackson and whomever else was popular at the time. And I looked around and I saw a bunch of like these all weird looking cards, really thin. And I didn't know any of the names. I'd never seen it. Basically, they were alien to anything I'd ever seen. And what they turned out to be were tobacco cards.
Wow.
Yeah, 1905, 1911, T205s and T206s. And there was it's 1968 Pete Rose, his Topps card, which I gotta admit, those things are ugly. But yeah, but that I wanted to learn more about them, and at the time there wasn't really a whole lot of like information, so that started me off of it. Eventually being a writer and researching. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. So speaking of writing and researching, you introduced me you shared this with me. You have a website, historythroughcards.com.
yes.
And it is no joke, man. Like it is like you've done your research here, and I was really impressed. And I'm not gonna pretend like I went through every single blog post there, but when did you start that, and how often do you contribute it, and to it, and how did that kind of evolve?
So I really wanted to start a business for a long time. I have a cousin who started a business, and he really kind of like it. It's kind of like a brother thing, You want to kind of outdo your own brother. So I wanted to kind of I always wanted to be a writer as well, and so the two kind of made sense. And so for the last, I don't know, 6 months, I've been playing around with it. Um, and like I love to write. It's not easy, but it is fun. And the just say the when you achieve your goal, I mean that's like everything. Uh, and like just that you can say yes, I did this. And if you're gonna fail, but it's some things, but if you can learn from them, which I did. I failed a lot, and I mean that's not gonna like stop me though from achieving my goal, which is a website. And honestly, I want to teach people. I want to and I want to learn as well. So uh, you know,
Yeah, it's inspiring, man. I mean, and you got to fail to get better. It's the only way to get better at anything. It's like we're not just born great at everything, at stuff. We've got to fail through it. So I totally get that. With my YouTube channel, I'm reminded all the time by others that I'm failing quite often, but that's all part of the fun of it, honestly. Like I just enjoy that process. I'm sure in the same way that you enjoy writing, it's like, and then when you actually do, create something that you're really proud of, you're like, damn, that's great. I did really good.
yeah, and the other thing is the hobby kind of teaches you how to fail as well. I would say that if you're not making mistakes, um, then there's something wrong, and you kind of have to make mistakes, and you have to. There's a lot of ways that you can get burned in the hobby. I want to try to minimize that as much as possible, um, but at the same time, like I want you to kind of like make mistakes and then learn from them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do you see kind of along that line? Being that you're a vintage guy, really, I would say, from what you've said and what you've shared. What do you see as far as the modern card market, or even if you're talking about vintage cards? What are some of those maybe pitfalls, or what's one pitfall, I guess, that to watch out for? And then also kind of piggybacking on that is what's your take on just the current market in general, all cards, whether it be vintage or modern or all of it.
So I think that can you repeat the question?
Yeah, and I actually asked like three questions in one.
Yeah, yeah,
So
no,
I'm
that's fine.
sorry about that. So what's your take on just the current market as it is now? Just let's start with modern and then we'll go to vintage. So
Okay.
what's your take on just the modern market right now? What are your thoughts?
Okay. So with the modern market, I see that there's a lot of Wall Street going on, and what I mean by that is a lot of buying and selling, and for a lot of high prices, which kind of bothers me a little bit, because so I'm not sure if the person who is getting into the hobby for just for the money is there for the right reasons. If they think it's a get rich quick scheme, and there's really no such thing, and you can really lose your shirt if that's your mentality. And I've heard dealers say that they don't even look at the cards. It's not even about the player. It's just buy and sell. And so that kind of scares me. And then the other thing is that a lot of a lot of collectors or dealers are saying that the market's going to crash. And in my experience, I've been in it for like 28 years now, over. My experience is I've only seen one major crash in the hobby, and that was beginning of 1992 or so, 93. And then probably I'd say it stopped about 90, 95, 96 when you saw it pick up again. I don't think anything's really going to go to zero, but with the new stuff, you can. It's definitely possible if you hold on to a card too long, or the player, because you're dealing with players that are active, and which is the greatest danger for any new person who's into the hobby. Or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you really got to do your research and your homework on basically on anything, really. It doesn't really matter what it is, but
yeah, agreed. How about vintage cards? Are you seeing kind of values in vintage cards, or do you think it's kind of in the same, like where it's just all kind of overpriced right now? And what's your take on vintage right now?
so there's a lot of room in vintage. It's definitely and both markets can be speculative. I think more on the the newer side of the hobby. But for the older hobby, the vintage side, there's a lot of great pickups, especially 1950s football. Yeah, me too. And 1960s, you can get Hall of Famers really cheap, which is what I did. I picked up a lot of 1950s football, or late 50s, I should say, because if you start getting into like Bowman from like 1940 or 1950 to 1955, those can be a little on the expensive side. But if you're brand new to the hobby and you want to get into vintage football specifically, like I would probably go for like 1956 to 1961, and you're going to find a lot of value. You're going to find a lot of ball players and football players that should be in the Hall of Fame in the next 5 to 10 years, that are not.
Yeah, football cards in general. I don't know if you compare it to baseball and basketball, it just lags behind as far as just overall. It's not to say there's not football fans out there. There's loads of football fans, and the NFL generates more revenue than any other league that we have here, in the U.S.
It always has. It always has.
It's just odd that football cards lag behind. One thing I was going to ask you, for vintage cards in general, whether you're talking about football, baseball, basketball, how do you protect yourself or try to protect yourself against, buying a card that might have been altered or trimmed, restored? Because that's always the worry for me. Especially if I'm going to buy a card on eBay, it's like, I don't have a good eye for it. You've been doing it for a long time. You probably have a pretty good eye for that sort of thing. But do you just buy those cards in person mainly, or how do you do it?
Well, I wear glasses, so my eyesight's a little shady these days. But so okay. I mean, that's a great question, because no matter how long you've been in the hobby for, you are guaranteed to get burned at least once, and there's no way around it. Even the greatest collectors that I've ever heard about have gotten killed on at least one deal. So in order to kind of minimize that, you need to study the card itself, the every aspect of that card. And so, like, every card, there's specific details to that particular card or that particular player, depending on where it is on the sheet. And check out the dimensions of the card, the stock. And so what I do is I have a black light. I have a gram scale. I try to make sure that I'm in a light, have a good lighting, so I can actually see the card. And I look at it under a microscope as well, or like a magnifying glass, and that's going to diminish a lot of what your fears are. Um,
So
but I also,
are you mainly buying in person?
I'm sorry,
Are you mainly buying in person then?
I try to.
Yeah.
Um, eBay is great, um, but you really have to kind of like have a rapport with the dealer, and I try to do that. It's easier in person as well. I mean, because you don't really. I've had a couple of cards that have never arrived, or have been stolen from the mail. Uh, so like I'm kind of like on the fence sometimes, or a lot of times when I do buy off eBay, I make sure to buy from a dealer that I know.
So if you were, and I guess here's a question. Let's just say you were going to buy a 58 tops Jim Brown rookie card. It's raw, but you don't own one. You're kind of new. Would you suggest maybe going and you kind of mentioned it, really understanding what that card is supposed to look like? Would you look at like graded copies of that card, like a higher grade one, so kind of what like really good coloring looks like, or to try to get an idea? Would you suggest something like that, or
Uh, so there's certain cards I would absolutely not buy ungraded.
okay,
Um, and that would be like a Jim Brown rookie, for instance, or a Ty Cobb, or a Wilt Chamberlain rookie, uh, and that's or Babe Ruth, right? So you have to understand that there are cards out there, and I think they have a list. Like somebody comes out with a list every year of the top 10 forged or altered cards in the hobby.
okay.
And yeah, and so like from there you can kind of like see like what's going on. Like uh, forgery isn't. It's still with us. It used to be bad back in the '80s and the '90s, and that's why Upper Deck had they changed their pack to a foil pack and had that little hologram, specifically because Cal Ripken Jr.'s tops traded and Mario Lemieux's rookie were forged so much that's the direction that they had to go through. They couldn't have any more wax packs.
Okay.
So yeah,
So it was really kind of okay, that's interesting. So that's what moved the technology forward in part, to the hologram and everything. Was that why they went to glossy cards, you think, as well, and all that to make it harder, or you just
yeah. Well, I think that was more of a ploy to get more money. If I remember correctly, Stadium Club was going for like maybe $1 or two more than the suggested retail price back in '91. And that kind of like I think you had Tip Tops Tiffany as well. And those cards are kind of like impossible as I remember it. But those all those cards are started. That's when you started seeing them go up instead of like 50 cents a pack. And I'm so kind of old that I remember when it was 25 cents a pack. So
yeah, I started out a little bit after you did. I just turned 40 and I started out really like 1987 was probably like maybe like end of 86, 87. So all the like 87 Donruss baseball or like 88, 89 Pro Set was my jam for football.
yeah, so let me ask you what got you back into to card collecting again?
For me, it was definitely kind of midlife, missing my childhood type deal. Because I got in 3 years ago, so it wasn't. I was 37, I guess, but I got back in for, comic books. And then also, and I went back to like, early 90s X-Men and Spawn and, the Image comics, Young Blood and Spawn and some of the Valiant stuff. I don't know if you remember the Valiant comic books, but like,
Vaguely.
yeah, Exo Man of War, Shadow
Yeah,
Man.
yeah.
I mean, it was just really a childhood thing. But part of it, when I got back in, I didn't understand graded. So when I was on eBay, I'm looking at cards and I'm like, I saw BGS. I immediately thought that Beckett was the way to go because I recognized Beckett because I had all the Beckett magazines when I was a kid. And I'm like, who the heck is PSA and what's SGC? And like that, they must be like smaller companies, like, but I did buy a Jim Brown rookie card a few years ago and a PSA 3. I bought, Joe Montana rookie card and a PSA 8. But right, of course, I wish I had bought everything in sight in 2018, early 2018. But I was, the most I spent, I think I spent $200 on the Jim Brown PSA 3, and that was really a stretch for me. I was thinking like that's a lot of money for a card, and so I put some money into it, but that was before the market really took off. I mean, I remember watching cards and it was pretty steady. I mean, it wasn't like, yeah, you'd have some kind of peaks and, valleys and stuff, but it wasn't like anything like we've seen the last 18 months. So, but I also crossed over into comic books because what was happening there, I thought it was kind of fun. First off, to buy stuff to collect that I had as a kid. But then also when there was new movies coming out, new Marvel movies or DC movies, whoever you would speculate on who the villain was going to be. And, if you got that, you buy the comic book ahead of time and, so that could be like a fun buy, sell, deal. So, but yeah, it was nostalgia. To give you kind of a long answer to your question. It was just kind of the missing my childhood, wanting to reconnect with that. That's what got me back in.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned about missing your childhood, because I it's the reason why I still have my collection. Or I had to go and rebuy all the baseball sets from the 1980s a number of years ago. My original collection got destroyed by water.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, so the thing is that they're really cheap at the time, and maybe so now, raw. But um, the one thing that I started to research and look at was baby boomers, our parents' generation, and why they got into the hobby in the late 70s and early 80s, and it was because they wanted a piece of their childhood back too.
Yeah.
And so they like I love the boomers, but they raised the prices on us. They were the original ones that to do that, and I you could see it in price guides, and people were complaining back then. But the more I delved into that, it wasn't just baby boomers. It was Lionel Carter. It was his generation, the greatest generation, is what he was a part of. And then prior to him, it was Jefferson Burdick. And those, so it's generational that we start to look back fondly on our childhood and try to grab a little bit of it as we get older. So the really funny thing is that I listened to you and Brad, and which I think is you guys are great. Truly, the way you guys go back and forth is fun. But the one thing that I kind of notice or wonder about is that the cards that you guys are collecting today, are we gonna have the generation 20 years from now collecting the cards that are today? I'm not sure, even if they're going to be collecting cards that I collect from like the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s. I have no idea. It's kind of open ended, I guess.
It is a good question. The one thing that I think that I've seen that surprised me, just starting this YouTube channel and just kind of mixing it up with viewership, is there are people that are collecting stuff that you would not think are collecting stuff. Like, for example, there was a guy that I think was 19 or something like that, and all he collected, he was DMing me on Twitter or something, but all he collects is pre-war cards. This is like a 19-year-old kid,
Okay.
basically. So, and I'm not saying that that's common, but I think that, I think there are people out there that are just collecting things that are, or tobacco cards, young people that are collecting tobacco cards. There's also historical significance that goes along with some of this too, with sports cards. I look at that and same thing when I buy old, I shouldn't say old because they're not that old, but when I buy early 1960s Silver Age comic books, like the early Marvel stuff, like the 1963, 1965 Marvel stuff, part of that is just the history of that book. I didn't grow up with that book. That my dad did. I was yelling at him the other day, how come you didn't keep any of this stuff? But there's definitely a historical component to it. And I think that that'll carry through. And I also wonder too, think about how much product costs today. You think about like how many 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds can't afford $1,000 hobby box or a $2,000 hobby box. But in 20 years, when they've got a career and they've got some money,
disposable income,
and they go back and those singles are still available. Maybe the boxes are still expensive, but maybe it's kind of like what we do now when I'm buying 89 score football cards. I couldn't afford it as a kid, but I've got a career now. I've got disposable income. What are the memories? I guess what are the youth of today gonna? It's exactly what you said. It's like, what are they going to be thinking about? In 25, 30 years, and maybe they'll come back to a time where, hey, dad was collecting cards, or mom was, or whatever, or comic books. Remember that sports card boom in 2020 when we couldn't afford anything, or whatever, and I think people will remember this time. I do think that. So, and maybe that's just the optimist in me. You could be right. Maybe everything goes to a digital world and physical stuff is not as cool. Or, the other side of that is maybe people go the digital route and then they circle back to the physical stuff because of that, kind of that nostalgia. Like they miss the physical stuff, that like circles back.
I kind of wanted to touch on that for a quick second, the digital. So I'm still learning about all the cryptocurrencies and the digital cards. I don't pretend to understand a lot of it, but the funny thing is I'm curious as to how you go about buying, selling, or trading the digital cards. Can you do it at a card show?
That's a really good point. It's kind of like, what is the future going to hold for all that stuff? And how, I guess, what is the utility, or how is it going to look? You're right. Because a lot of the stuff is tied to a video game, or it's tied to, something. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that we just don't know yet with some of these digital assets and digital collectibles. And some people think it's just a fad and it's going to go away, which that could be true too. It could just be like a few years where NFTs and digital cards were a thing. Maybe it'll be like, what was the white Coke, or what was it? The clear Pepsi?
Absolutely disgusting.
It'll be clear maybe Coke. NFTs are clear Pepsi.
Or new was it new Coke? That was from like 1985. So yeah, I mean, you do see a lot of fads, especially in the hobby. And I kind of talk about that in my articles. But yeah, it's the one thing I love personally. I love to feel the card. And certain vintage cards, they'll have a certain smell to them too. And it comes about with age, and it's something you can never get with a digital card. But I think I think both of them are definitely going to have their place. It's just where in the hobby, you know.
Right. Right.
I think everything has its place, so you
I
just have
agree.
to, yeah, you just have to figure out where it is going to go. Um, and so I kind of like with that is I would say to any collector, besides investigating cards, is to figure out what direction you want your collection to look or go in or look like. If you spread yourself too thin or too much, you can really kind of like get into some trouble with that. You can't really collect everything, unfortunately. So, um,
I'm
you know,
trying to collect everything. I'm trying my best.
it's tough. It's tough. And and you know, there's
This is
cards.
my wife. This is my wife chiming in here.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
There's cards like that I've never seen, and I've been in this for a long time, and so like it's the one thing I really love about the hobby is you never know what you're gonna see, especially at a show you're gonna see like if you go to the national, which I'm hoping it happens. I'm dying for it.
Are you planning to go?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Okay, good.
I've only been to one, and that was in 2003 at Atlantic City. And I'm glad they don't have it in Atlantic City because I get sick every time I go to New Jersey. So there must be something in the water, but Montezuma's revenge or something. But you're gonna find stuff at the national that you've never seen before, and there's also it's kind of true also with eBay as well. Um, so I'm just kind of dying for to get out and go to a show and meet people. And I mean, this hobby is really meant to be shared with other people.
Oh,
So
absolutely. I know I'm going to this Dallas show this weekend, and it is more of a people are asking me what cards you looking for and stuff like that. And there's a couple things I've got my eye on, but it's more about just meeting a lot of people that I've been talking to for over a year that I've never met in person. I've talked to them on, a live stream, or I've talked to them, on Twitter or whatever, and it'll be nice to actually meet people in person, so yeah, it'll be more of a kind of a networking thing, really.
yeah, having a rapport, building a rapport with people and with dealers is always, I think it's fundamental, and how you interact with people as well, and haggling over prices. It's kind of like it's a skill I think everybody should have.
Yeah, I remember, I think my first foray into the business world was haggling with 40-year-old card dealers in 1988. And I lost a lot, because, they were really the only game in town to buy singles. It's not like today you go to a card shop and you haggle and then you're like, all right, well, I'll just go on eBay or I'll go on StarStock and see, unless it's something very rare that the dealer
Right.
might have or something old, vintage, for the most part, you can walk away and say, all right, I'll go check, I'll walk away and go to eBay and see if it pops up there. But back in 1988, that was not an option.
I that's funny because first off, I love that '88 Topps baseball set. I think it's and the '87 Topps set is always kind of like pigeons in a park. They were like everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's funny to see younger generations go for those cards. Because I used to trash them, but the thing is that they completing those sets 86, 87, 88. I completed those sets with my dad, and it's one of the top memories I have of them. But here's the thing: is what happens to all the common cards from those years? Where do they go? Who collects them?
Yeah.
I have a theory that a lot of card companies issued uh, name play like the future Hall of Famers, the stars, in greater quantities than your average Joe ball player.
You think so?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I'm finding a lot of rarities, but it's not like, for the most part, it's not like your Ted Williams, except for the 54 Bowman, which was a contractual dispute. It's not your Babe Ruth. It's your players, your everyday average ball players that you've never heard of, who are the real rarities.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when do you think that started? You know, when we're talking about like years and stuff, I always think about that with 89 Upper Deck Baseball. Because if you think about that set, you have like the Griffey card, and then you have what, 400 other cards that are like, how many of those went to landfills? You know, it's like, yeah, all the
They're in with the ET video games from Atari.
That's a great documentary. Have you
I
seen
saw
that
it.
documentary? Love
It's
that.
awesome. Yeah. It's great. It really is. I don't know like what happens to those cards, and who collects them. I personally I completed an 84 Donruss set, because it was a childhood memory of mine that I couldn't get it when it came out. And same with the Star basketball cards. And so I kind of recently, like, it's the small guys that I had the hardest time trying to find. And I've noticed that a lot of other collectors say the same things, that when they're completing their sets, it's the guy that you would never think of. You know, it's not like Babe
Yeah.
Ruth, it's not Dizzy Dean or whomever. So
Now the Star basketball cards, didn't they come in like team packs?
they did. And when I was a kid, nobody wanted those cards. They trashed them. They said, I remember one kid saying like, that those aren't worth anything. Don't collect them. So I didn't. And
Where were they selling them? Those
so
team bags.
so from what I've heard, from what I've researched, they were sold through, I think, certain dealers, and then through stadiums. So you couldn't actually buy an entire set back then. You could only buy like bags. And so you had like a basic set, but then you had like other little sets, like of like 15 or 20, depending on the team, like team sets, from what I gather. And so you have some serious rarities. And the thing with those cards is they never really produced a whole lot of them to begin with. I think the owner ended up, I think he ended up going to jail. And
I read about that because he ended up printing off more or something that were not the same, or fakes, or I don't know, something wacky. He did it on like Home Shopping type of a channel
Home
or
Shopping
something.
Network, yeah. Yeah. I'm not the entire expert on this set, at least not yet. But um, they are nice cards. You can get some great deals for now, but I think people are starting to understand that, for the most part, they are pretty tough to come by. And you have Michael Jordan's rookie, his true rookie, in I think 1985, and you have a whole bunch of other rookie cards too. John Stockton, Patrick Ewing is in that set. It's just so the 86 Flair, which I always wanted and I could never get my hands on. In fact, a lot of the basketball cards from like the 80s I couldn't get. Um, and I didn't start getting them until I started watching your show, actually. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I started to look into that, because you were talking about them, and I was like, you know what? I love basketball, and I love the '80s, and so I wanted to start a collection, and I did, and they're right now they're cheap. The '86 Flair kind of bother me a little bit. Not the way they look, but it's the price. It's the
You really pay a premium for that set.
100%.
And they printed them a lot more than like 87 Fleer, for example. Like 87 Fleer, from my understanding, has a lower print run than 86, and then they printed the heck out of 88. But that's when they were printing a lot. And 88, 89 is when they started cranking it out.
Yeah. And I've been able to find a lot of value in like the late 70s and early 80s basketball, and then like especially like the 87 Flair. But even those are starting to creep up in value. Um, but the 81 Tops is actually quite a nice set. And you can get, all sorts of players, Dr. J, Larry Bird, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. A lot of those late 70s cards are really cheap. And unfortunately for me, I kind of forgot the value of a dollar. And so it got me into trouble. That's one of my worries about the new hobby, the modern hobby, is that there's a lot of dealers that do lose sight of a value of a dollar, because you can run through money like water, and quickly forget. It's you're and at one point, like, it scared me to see that much money on a table, on a dealer's table. And I mean, I could tell you some scary stories about that. But yeah,
there's endless supply. It feels like there's so many options. It's kind of like what you said, you can't collect everything, but man, there's so many different, sets, players. Even in modern, there's a lot, let alone if you start going back into all the vintage options. And I know the 80s is not really vintage, but just in the 80s, I could spend a fortune just on 80s cards. There's just so much I like out of those sets.
Yeah, those I mean, the 86 and the 87 Flair are really nice looking, and you do have a great selection, with like the 70s and early 80s basketball as well. I like it. I really enjoy it, and it's not the money. And the thing is, for me personally, is money is really low on my list of why I collect. I collect for the history, and I collect for the artwork and the player, and it's the thrill of the hunt, and the collector gatherer in all of us.
Yep.
I think that's it's really it.
And speaking of, you just mentioned the history of it. I know I mentioned it when we first started the stream, but I want to go back to it. Ryan has a site, History Through Cards, THROUGH, historythroughcards.com. And he's got blog posts on all, he's done a ton of research on cards going all the way back to the beginning of cards. It's a tremendous site. So definitely check that out. I've perused it. I have a lot of work to do to catch up on it, but it's awesome. I love it. And so Ryan had mentioned earlier, he really enjoys writing, and, so definitely check that out. If it's something of interest, if you're looking to research older sets or just kind of history of sports cards, start there. It's really, really well done. One thing that you mentioned, Ryan, I had Devin on last week, and he was talking about stamps, and then you were kind of making a correlation with comic books. What was that you kind of drew there?
All right, so yeah, I found Devin to be really interesting in what he was saying about stamps, and when Jefferson Burdick, he if you're not familiar with him, he basically, so he founded the hobby. He's the reason why I get to write about sports cards, and I collect. Yeah. So like, next time you think about him, raise a glass, because so he got together with a couple of other pioneer collectors and kind of hashed out how this hobby was going to start, and the pricing system, and eventually he wanted a guide, a price guide. So the he had nothing to go on except what was going on in the stamp world. And
Yeah.
stamps in the 1930s was like baseball cards now. Um, everybody collected stamps or coins. So that's how he came up with a pricing system, was through the stamp guide. Um, and one thing about Lionel Carter, he's another exciting guy. One thing about Jefferson Burdick was he was physically disabled. He what he was able to accomplish in his 63 years is truly remarkable. He had a a crippling form of arthritis,
Mm.
and at a young age, I think he was born in 1900, so about 1931 or so. He noticed that there was something off, and but again, it never stopped him from completing what he did. And he is truly one of my heroes, as a person, not just as a founding collector. So the other thing about was it comic books, right? So there's a correlation between comic books and baseball or sports cards, and that has to do with EC comics from the 1950s, and it's Tales from the Crypt and Weird Science and stuff that I used to read as a kid, and
Love it.
yeah, and I love the artwork, and so what happened was, a lot of those writers and artists were basically, they're losing their jobs from EC, and they had to go somewhere, and they found it at Tops, and so
Oh,
Tops,
okay.
yeah, even in the 1940s with was it Gum Inc. or Bowman, those guys were contributing as well to a lot of their sets as like freelance, and so uh, you have a lot of the same writers and artists doing those sets as well, from EC.
That's interesting. Stan Lee, the founder of Marvel, people don't realize that he was writing comic books and doing the whole comic book thing like 15 years before he ever did Marvel comics. And it was the same sort of deal where he had small jobs, in and out of companies. It's not like he was a big superstar, and then it just happened that was his passion. He, happened into Marvel, and it blew up. But I mean, it's not as if he just sprung on with, oh, I'm going to do comic books. I mean, it was a journey.
Yeah, and so you have like Tarzan and Batman, and I can think a few others. You do have a Marvel set from 1960. A lot of those from like 1966. Those sets are tops. Mars Attacks.
Yep.
I wrote a fairly lengthy article on that. But but yeah, those those cards in particular are of interest to me historically, and not just for the artwork as well. So
That's awesome, man. What about you had talked about Atari video games? Are you collecting those? Are you buying are you into the graded video game thing, or is it more just kind of fun nostalgia stuff?
yeah, so I grew up with an Atari. It still works. Um, Atari as a company to me is fascinating. There is
Yeah.
a great book on Atari artwork. I forget the guy's name right off the top of my head, but as far as graded video games, that's kind of a weird thing for me. I absolutely love the artwork, and that's what got basically Atari on the map, was the artwork, and I'm sure Sega as well. That brings me straight back to my childhood, like 100%. Um, I I think video games now. I have an emulator, so I can play all those classic games.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and because I think the first console to die on me was Nintendo, and then Sega. I had that for like 23 years. So they don't really last long. Um, and so that was one of the reasons why I got an emulator. And plus, with technology, it may be really tough to play the original consoles on new TVs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So uh, I think when I'm in my 80s or something, like in the nursing home, rocking out to like Van Halen, I'll still be playing video games. And the one thing I kind of like want to know is, uh, can video games help you with your memory and your motor skills as you get older? I'm just wondering. I'm curious.
I know it is kind of an interesting debate because it's always like, I know like my parents are like, too much screen time. You don't want to be staring at the screen. But at the same time, I feel like it had to have helped my hand-eye coordination. I don't think it hurt my hand-eye coordination. It's like video games, I think are they bring value there. I have to assume that. It's probably, if it's too much of an extreme, if you're playing maybe 12 hours a day, unless you're a professional gamer or something, I don't know.
Right.
But I guess it's finding some balance. But yeah, that's actually a good point. Can
Yeah,
that help motor skills and stuff as you age up?
and,
Yeah,
and your memory and everything in moderation, including moderation.
exactly.
Yeah.
Moderation. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll really throw it back. My first foray into video games was my parents had a Commodore 64 that had the floppy disks, that you put in. My
Wait, what's a
favorite
floppy disk again?
what's that?
What's a floppy disk again?
I know you talk to the kids nowadays, they're like, "What are you talking about, man? Were you sending telegrams too?" Like, but yeah, so I had there's a game, and YouTube is the best because you can literally find all of this stuff. And my favorite game on there was Mail Order Monsters was the name of the game, and it's such a basic game when you look at it now, but man, it was incredible when I was 7 years old. But the patience that you had to learn back then to like you delicately put the floppy disk into the drive, and then of course like it loads or it doesn't load. You got to blow on it. You got to shut it properly. All the stuff as a kid that you have to just carefully do to take care of the stuff. But on YouTube, I went and I searched it up, and there's Mail Order Monsters, and they're playing it, and I was like, oh my gosh, you can actually still play this game. It's incredible. But my dad still has the Commodore 64, so I told him I don't. My siblings are not getting that. Like I want that. Just they don't remember it the same way I remember it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, but yeah, it's crazy. But it's just it's going back to what we were talking about. It's all nostalgia fueled stuff for me. It's and I think what's great is there's so many like-minded people that are in the same boat. When I look at like people that watch my show, it's mostly 35 to 45-year-olds that are feeling the same way that I'm feeling, same way that you're feeling, about this stuff. So, you kind of, you have all this like-mindedness, that's fun.
Yeah, and I saw you had you're talking to Jennifer Topshot, and
Yeah.
I'm really happy to see. I do see women in the hobby, and the thing is, like, we could use anybody or everybody, all inclusive. I hate to see when somebody gets burned and they don't want to come back to the hobby.
Right.
And I would just say, like, take your time with it, and just understand that there are bad people in the hobby, but there's a lot more good ones, and
Yeah.
and you have to find them. They're out there, you, me, you know. a lot of guys and girls out there that are gonna help you. I mean,
Yeah, and I talked about it on a video a couple of days ago, but I feel like there's a lot of people too that are like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go buy packs of cards, and then they go online, they look for packs, they see $1,000 hobby box, and they're like, maybe I don't want to do this. Or they hear about how retail product, there's a line around the building, they're not gonna be able to get it, and then they don't get into it. And there's so many different ways to get involved. And so that's what
yeah,
the point of the video was. It was either yesterday or the day before. But it was just kind of like, hey, here's a few different other things that hopefully if you're new coming in, or if you're just coming back in, there's so many ways to attack this and enjoy it, outside of just a couple.
yeah. The hobby box, really, kind of the $1,000, $2,000 hobby box. I would say like that's bizarre to me. Where's the you're really gambling. You're really gambling at that point. I would say that you need a little bit of help, and not you, but people who do that. And I would say that there is um, a growing group of collectors out there that are worried that they are addicted, and that's I understand that completely. Um, because I got addicted to new stuff, not new, but 80s basketball and football from the 50s and 60s because it was so cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least
Well,
I know it.
yeah, we've got, yes, absolutely. I mean, when you think about breaks, I mean, breaks can be fun, but you have to be careful that, just like with anything else, if you get in on, a lot of breaks, you can spend a lot of money pretty quickly in breaks. And look, if you know what you're getting into, or if you have loads of disposable income and you can afford it, then that's one
Yeah.
thing. But
Yeah.
I don't think that everybody was in that boat, that was doing a lot of breaks, a year, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago, or whatever. So I've only done a couple of breaks in my life, but I'm not really much of I wouldn't call myself really much of a gambler at all. I understand that buying and selling sports cards in itself is risky, but I've never really been into really high risk stuff like that. I would rather just buy a single where I know exactly what I'm getting.
Yeah. Yeah. The entire hobby is a risk. And if you really want
Big
to get
time.
down to it, and you shouldn't really buy and sell if you're just in it for the money. I mean, it's you know, for me, it is all about the other stuff I had mentioned. The money is last. If I make profit, great. But I'm more interested in, like I say, the history of it, the artwork, the player especially, and a lot of those players, like a lot of the older ball players, I've known personally, and I've had conversations with them, and it corresponded over the years. So so if I'm collecting a vintage player like, say, Bob Feller or Johnny Pesky, like, I knew those guys quite well. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, you know what I'm saying, and it's more about the you know the history of those guys, my memories of them. So you know,
Yeah, and I feel like if you're in something just for the money, you can be in, then you could buy and sell anything. It's like you may as well find something that you really enjoy buying and selling, because you can buy and sell a zillion different things. I mean, um, I think that you do have to have some sort of, if it's going to be anything lasting, if it's going to be something that you're actually going to do for a decent amount of time, you have to be somewhat interested in whatever that is. So it always kind of baffled me when it was like, yeah, I'm just in it. I'm just here to make a few bucks. Like, really? There's a lot of things you can do to make a few bucks.
yeah, yeah, it's not really a get rich quick scheme. You can make some good money, and I've known people who have made some great money, but at the same time, I also know a lot of people have gotten burned badly. too, including yours truly. Um, yeah, but that's why, like I say, uh, you should surround yourself with good people and knowledgeable collectors and dealers. And I did that. I did that early on, and I'm still learning. Every day is a learning, a chance to learn. It's you're never going to stop. Like from the day you're born to the day you pass away.
I
I
agree.
agree.
But as much as I learn, I'll probably always be buying 89 score football. Even
Yeah. What
forever.
what turns you on about that set?
It is because when I was a kid, it was the unaffordable set. It was the I get, I don't know if this is, I don't think it was retail because I don't remember seeing it in, the gas stations and the grocery stores. There was a lot of 89 Pro set, football and other sets, but I did not see 89 score outside of my card shop. So I don't know if that was just a hobby only product or what, but it was definitely less. I can't say that it was definitely, but I believe it was printed quite a bit less than 89 Pro set, and it seemed more rare. And then
Yeah.
I like the big helmets I just like the design. It had it was just different. The Barry Sanders rookie card, the Troy Aikman rookie card. I remember I mean, it's not like it was short printed. I know they printed a lot of 89 score, but in comparison to some of the other sets, and then you just have so many Hall of Famers in that set for football. I don't know. I love it.
So are, are you collecting a lot of vintage baseball, basketball, or hockey, or anything like that?
Yeah, I kind of go through phases where I try to look to see where price points are, and then I focus in on where I feel like. So if price points are at a point for particular sets where I think there's some value, then I'll go in on those particular sets. But it's kind of like what we talked about. There's so much that I want to buy. I have to do it that way. I desperately try to not chase, when something becomes popular. Something I've been buying a little bit more of that I've never bought before are exquisite and national treasures football cards, and of just players that I like. Like I picked up, a Barry Sanders auto. I wanted a Barry Sanders auto anyway, and then I was
Yeah.
looking at the options, and I'm like, why would I? I was looking at kind of price points, like why don't I get national treasures or exquisite when those are short printed sets? They're expensive. The boxes are extremely expensive, but the singles are relatively, I mean, there's some value in there, if you can find the right price. I'm not
Right.
saying look, you can go on eBay and there's, buy it nows for high prices, but you can catch them here and there where you can negotiate.
I think Brad had said something really interesting. He said, "Don't buy anything new. Don't buy a new product." And that my antennas went up on that because he's 100% right, and he's 100% right, and that can really destroy a budding collector, I think, and that it is how you can get into a lot of serious financial trouble by buying
Yeah.
new product. I've seen it dozens of times over the last 20 some odd years, where you know a stadium club especially, they'd be like $3 a pack, and now what you can get those cards for dirt cheap, cheaper than what they were going for when they came out, obviously.
Yep.
And a lot of the 80s stuff, uh, specifically for me personally, um, when I was I think I was like 7 or 8 years old in 1986. My aunt had gotten me a bunch of packs of 86 Don Russ, and I pulled a Jose Canseco rookie out of a pack. Immediately lost it. Thanks, Aunt. Appreciate it. So years later, I think I was booking for like $90 at the time, and I think the set was about 130, 140.
Yeah.
And so now you can. I rebought that particular card. I autographed um, for I think like 20 bucks.
I know it's crazy. I
Yeah,
remember, so my story with that is 89 score Thurman Thomas rookie cards in the card shop back when, and back in 89, 90, those were like 60, 70, $80 raw, and of course everything is like mint, in the card store because
yeah.
there's no grading to say otherwise. So everything's near mint to mint, whatever. Um, and then about a year and a half ago, maybe now, I bought a PSA 10 Thurman Thomas rookie for like $50, and now it's gone up. Now it's selling at maybe like 120 or something, or 110, 120. But it was the same sort of thing where I remember that I was like, man, these cards were so expensive when I was a kid. And now PSA 10s are actually less than, where the price is now.
I wanted to ask you really quickly about grading in general and how you feel about AI, because I actually have a really good feeling about it.
You think it's going to be positive for the hobby? Is that what you mean?
I think it's going to be beneficial. I think it's absolutely 100% needed. Um, and I don't think that they're going to be able to pull back from AI. Um,
I agree. I agree. Look, I think if we look at kind of trends and everything, would it be that shocking if in 10 years AI does maybe like 80% of the grade and then, a human does 20%? Because that would be kind of how everything kind of automates. That's how industry automates
yeah,
itself. So wouldn't it make sense that eventually it gets good enough to where the AI takes care of the majority of it, but there is a human that looks over it. I don't think it'll ever be 100% AI. I think that there will be a human that gives maybe the first look and the last look, or just the last look. But yeah, I think I think it will be good too. I think it'll
I
be good.
yeah, and then one of the reasons why is because we have had problems with graders and grading over. And in fact, there's a book called The Card, that deals with the T206 Wagner that uh, I think it's the Gretzky McNall Wagner, the one that was trimmed. And that was graded. It should have been graded authentic. Instead, it was graded. Um, I think it was a PSA 8. Uh, so that you have scandals like that, but now you've got other issues with say PSA and Beckett grading cards and autographs that are either trimmed or autographs that are forged, and that's a huge problem. We don't know how many cards that these grading companies have have graded, authenticated, that are out there. And so I think for one thing, AI is going to really kind of like diminish that and make it really harder for card doctors going forward.
Yeah.
And for the auction houses too, like they're not off the hook with me. I scrutinize them as much as possible, and with any company really. And there's a economist that I've followed for years, Roger Babson, and he came up with the 10 Commandments of investing, and so one of the things he said was to scrutinize small companies, but I say scrutinize all companies, and do your homework on them as much as possible, and don't you know the one great thing about Jim Beckett, and honestly, I loved that you had Jim Beckett on, and that was awesome.
I was
Yes,
really nervous. I was really nervous for that one. I actually botched it. I feel like I did not do a very good job interviewing him. But yeah, but it's like he's like the Michael Jordan of sports cards to me. He's
yeah,
a legend.
yeah. I wouldn't worry about it. You can always get him on again, and the more people you talk to, the better off you're gonna be. The better you're gonna be. With anything too. Uh, but yeah, I think I think the hobby is going to be in a better place in the next 10, 15 years with AI. Um, and going forward, some collectors and dealers they might not like it, but I
Yeah.
think it's needed. I really do. And with Jim Beckett in particular, he's really outstanding because I read his stuff. I think you did too. His Beckett's, um, and how he came up with a price. Basically, I think what he did was to standardize a Wild West hobby. And when it came to everything that we think of now, he kind of put it in place for the rest of us. And some people, or some collectors, or dealers, or whoever, are trying to rewrite it and create a new wheel. You know,
Yeah.
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Jim Beckett is, I'm excited to see him in Dallas. He'll be there. So yeah,
Get
I
his
mean,
autograph.
I'm going to bring a Beckett. I'm going to bring, I've got the Michael Jordan issue. I think that's issue number 1. I'm trying to figure out, I've got a Barry Sanders issue that I think is number 2 or number 3. It's the one where he's like running. You would know it. I might have it over here somewhere, but yeah, I'm going to take one of the Beckett's and see if he'll sign it.
So what I did was I collect old Beckett and old hobby publications and auction catalogs, and I have about maybe 35 years worth, and so I go back and forth and I track the prices of a lot of these cards, to see where they've gone historically. And the one thing I've found throughout all of my research is kind of universal, is that knowledge, it can go missing. There's a lot of missing history in general, um, and there's a lot of hobby knowledge that may have been universal when Jefferson Burdick was starting, and it didn't find its way to me or my generation, uh, because I really had to kind of learn this stuff over. I think it's like our generation really kind of had to. Um, I wanted to learn more about the guys who started this hobby, and there wasn't really anything for me to go by, and the more people I asked, they didn't really know either. A lot of these hobby publications, they're they're not digitized, and so
Yeah.
we're kind of missing, key aspects of how they came to their conclusions, and why they thought the way they did, and how they went about, a price guide or even checklists. I mean, you know, they really didn't have checklists, for a lot of our vintage cards. Those we take those for granted, and there's still cards that may have been printed 150 years ago that we're still coming across. So my thought is that, today we think that there's nothing to look for. There's um, but 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, they could find cards that were printed today that they never knew about.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I know there are obscure card sets, that are found all the time. There's one guy that I like to follow, Yamwax is his name. I don't know if you've seen him. He's on Instagram, and then he's also on Twitter as well, Yamwax.
It's a
But
great name.
yeah, it's a great name. But he finds a lot of the odd, difficult to find cards. And it could be sports cards, it could be non-sports cards, it could be Pokemon cards, all different types of cards of different things. And I like that. I follow him because he'll post different stuff, and it's kind of cool to see because there might be a set that you didn't remember from childhood, and then he'll find it, or it's just something you never knew existed. and that's part of what makes this, the hobby really fun, I think, is there is always something to find, it seems like.
Yeah, there's always. I'm still looking at cards that I never saw before. In fact, there was Topps used to have cards on the bottom of their boxes. I think they're box bottoms, and they're the same exact cards from like the '80s, but they're different colors. And so I may have seen them, but I had no idea what they were. And so it's one thing I love about the hobby is you never know what you're going to come across. You know,
What is this? Do you know this set?
I do. In fact, that's a Philadelphia company. Those are extremely rare cards. There's a few of them a few players that are maybe one player known of the particular. They're still trying to find. They don't even know what a whole set looks like. It's a great set. It is. Yeah, thanks for showing that. That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
black and white, great.
awesome. Are there certain things, we're going to wrap up here soon. We're already at an hour and 15 minutes. I didn't even realize where we were time wise. We just like, time flies, man. We'll kind of end on like, what are you kind of looking for now? Or are there certain things that you're kind of collecting? And like what I told you, like right now I'm kind of looking at exquisite national treasures football. But then I've always got my eye on, 80s basketball or maybe 70s football, or, so I go in and out of different things. But is there anything in particular that you're searching for right now, or just keeping on the watch list?
Yeah. There's 1940 Detroit Tigers set that I'm looking at, and some of the 1940s play ball, and so some of that stuff I've actually never seen. A 1939 Father and Sons. Uh, so I actually collect baseball, basketball, hockey, football, golf, tennis, and horse racing. For whatever reason, I love horse racing.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of the British stuff, a lot of the stuff that you can't really find, and the other thing too is I'm really into old old Hollywood, so I collect old Hollywood cards. And so Mary Pickford in the 1920 F&J Smith set
Wow.
is something that I've been looking for a long time. In fact, there's an 1888 is it Honest Long Cut Presidential Possibilities, which has sports. They have a couple of sports players in there. A lot of those people in that set were very influential in baseball and in sports in general, and sports cards. But it took me about, I don't know, 17 years to try to track down. There was Ignatius Donnelly in that set, and he's the reason why we kind of know about Atlantis. He's a senator and he wrote a book about it.
Okay.
Yeah, but so I'm a very patient guy when it comes to.
Yeah, 17 years, man. That's commitment.
Yeah, there's some cards I've waited forever on. So and I really enjoy like I said, I really enjoy the basketball and the star cards in general. The photography is phenomenal.
I love those.
Yeah, I highly recommend. And then the 81 Topps basketball as well, and the 79 and 78. You have a lot of great ball players in there.
Yes, somebody shared a star Michael Jordan card that I hadn't seen. I thought there was only maybe there is only three of them, but it has a blue border and he's shooting a jump shot.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure it's 85. Maybe it's a different year, but it's such a great looking star card. It's all blue and he's like in the middle of a shot. But yeah, I love those star cards. If I look at graded copies, they're really expensive. And it's like, I just haven't gotten around to them yet. And then it's like,
yeah.
raw, then I'm nervous. I'll be the guy that buys the, one of the few million that was printed at the home shopping, station, or, because that's the reason why. Isn't that the reason why like PSA won't grade them, is because of the possibility?
Yeah, from what I've heard, one of the true collectors who knows about that set actually reached out to PSA to go over the cards with them, and so at one point they did, and then they stopped. That is a set that you do have to kind of be careful with, but if you know what you're looking for, you should be okay. And the one thing I try to do is give a breakdown on the printing of our cards as well. And so each card that at least that I examine, I will go over the printing and the artwork of it, and I go over everything else between science and how these cards were issued, printed, who the owners were. In fact, there's not a whole lot on a lot of these owners, and if it wasn't for them, like we wouldn't have cards. Guys like James Duke and Gowdy and D Long. I've been able to track down a lot of that information that's been it's either not printed or it's been lost.
Yeah.
And because I'm in Boston, we've got about five major companies who printed cards in the 1930s that Gowdy, obviously. And I highly recommend those cards if you're really into vintage. If you start just getting started out into vintage, Gowdy is probably the way to go, or Bowman, your early Bowmans. Some of those are pretty cheap still. So there's ways to go about it.
One thing I do that, and I am by no stretch of the imagination a vintage baseball guy, but I've been just looking at it. I like to pay attention to it. But the one thing that I thought was interesting is if you buy, you can get fairly reasonable pricing on like Mickey Mantle cards that are not, maybe like late 50s, early 60s in lower grades, so it's not a rookie card. It's not maybe like a 5th year card of Mantle. But if you want Mantle cards, there are some out there, and they might not be a PSA 9 or something, but you can actually get a hold of one, at a fairly decent price.
Yeah, so always buy what you can afford and what's available, and understand that not everything is going to be found in near mint condition.
Right.
You're going to find cards that that are going to be in off condition, especially as they get older. Like a lot of cards in my collection are not found, and they're found in okay condition, but it's only because some cards you'll have to find or buy when you can find them, because you may never have another chance. And even so, I bought a 61 Flair Chamberlain about maybe I don't know how many years ago, but I bought it for 200. And the thing is, that's a card I'd never be able to afford now because of the price is so outstanding. It was a lot of money, but what the awesome thing was, the dealer was like, you can pay me $100 now and then pay me $100 the next time I see you, and here's the card. And I was like, wait, what? And like, he's like, don't worry, like, I trust you. And the thing is, like, now I have to come back, which is no problem. But if I don't have that $100, if I try to abscond with the card, like, that's my name, right? That's my reputation now. If I see that guy, if I didn't pay that guy the next time, and I go back at a card show and he sees me, now my name is ruined. It's you know what I'm saying? So I'd say, like, it's always easier to be honest and fair. You don't really have to be a nice guy, but you do have to be fair in the hobby, and that's one way you clean it up too, by the way. And so, like, yeah, you're not gonna you're not always going to find a lot of cards in near mint condition, but you should research what you're looking for, and then understand that if you do find a card that you're looking for, you might not have another chance, or it may be very expensive.
Yeah, because you're really dealing, especially with a lot of people that watch the channel are just dabbling into modern, but when you get into which modern is widely accessible, for the most part, it's not very rare. But like you said, I mean, the one set you've been looking for 17 years trying to complete a set, I mean,
Yeah.
that's like a chase, So yeah, you're right. I mean, it's kind of like you have to be ready, for that card, but you put the time in, you researched it, you knew exactly what you wanted, and it just came at a price that you could make it happen. I
Right.
think that all that backstory is the part that has to happen.
Yeah, I picked up a 1960 Topps Mickey Mantle. But unfortunately what happened was that I was at a show a couple of years ago, and here in Boston, and I drove home. I went home. I didn't pick it up then, and man, I was tossing and turning, and I was like, I should have picked it up. I should have picked it up, and I literally had sweat like coming down my forehead, and I was afraid that I missed out on, because that, I mean, it had like a small crease, a hairline crease in it on the side, but everything else was gorgeous, and it's Mickey Mantle. So
Yeah.
I went back the next day. Fortunately, it was there, and I haggled over the price. I got it really cheap because it's off grade card, and some of those are probably the best kind of cards. You can always, for a lot of cards, you can upgrade.
I am with you on that. So there's something, and crossing over to comic books too. So what I've been doing is I've been buying. I'm not gonna say I've been buying a lot because I haven't been buying a lot, but what I've been really looking at, I bought a couple. Like for example, I bought a Incredible Hulk #4 from 1964 or whatever, but and it's not an overly special book as far as like it's not a first appearance of a villain. It's not a there's not anything amazing about it other than that's the fourth issue ever of that particular franchise, and it is his origin story retold. So that's kind of and the cover is cool. It's got a great cover on it. And I bought it. It's a CGC, which is that's the main grading company. It's a 3.5. So it's not like it's not a near mint copy. A near mint copy would be probably 10 grand or something,
Right.
or more. But for me, it's more about how many of these are still in circulation at a decent, that still have all the pages, that still have a cover on it, that still have,
Right.
that
It decreases.
yeah.
And here's the other thing is that we actually don't know how many cards survive. I mean, just because it's graded, that only means that it's how many that the card company, the grading company has graded, but it's not the overall population that's survived. It's there are companies and there are cards that do have print runs. Like say Top Tiffany, for example. Certain cards, when the numbered cards, how many were issued, but you don't know how many actually survive. And given with age and everything else that humanity has to throw at them,
Yeah.
it kind of decreases over time.
Well, and think about every single card, whether it be a vintage card or a modern card in any grade that has ever had their case cracked to resubmit for a higher grade. That's still counted on the pop report. So,
I only use population reports to find out where the majority of the cards are, and when it comes to are they very good, excellent? Are you going to find them in good, very good condition? And that's the majority. And so the population reports really, I don't take them at face value. For the most part, maybe 90%. I don't. There may be like 5 or 10% that you actually can, because collectors do pop them open to send them in, and that's again like where AI may be able to stop that, from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. It's all, with all this stuff, you have to take it as just kind of one data point, whether it be a pop report, whether it be eBay sales that you're looking at. Because the other thing too is like how many sales are happening at card shows, at card shops, on Facebook Marketplace, on Twitter, on Instagram, that never are counted into the the sales. Like there's no way for us to know all the sales. Now, what you're looking for is you're looking for very scarce stuff. Like, so it's not as if, there's going to be a lot of sales of it everywhere to where you can, try to track,
Right.
you kind of have an idea based on what you've seen stuff sell for in the past, but you're chasing pretty scarce stuff with the older vintage. But even with the modern stuff that's new, it's like we just, you have to take those things with a grain of salt and just say like, okay, well, we've got a data point here. We've got a general idea. This thing is giving me, a data point to look at.
Yeah, I also would say too that the price guide overall has kind of hurt the hobby, and I say that is because it really hurt comic books, and people have blamed price guides for the comic book crash. And so the thing is, like, when you're at a show or a convention, you can use the price guide as a starting point, but I found that a lot of like what's in a price guide you can just kind of like toss at a show, and because there's a multitude of factors on that. But I carry one on me, just because I don't have a photographic memory or something, But
it's a starting point.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't matter. And you shouldn't be so rigid either. I mean, when you're buying and selling, you should really kind of like understand that like there's a give and take. If you price your cards out too much, it's either because you don't want to sell the card, or which is really the case I see a lot of times, especially in the vintage, or you don't understand the economics and how it works, and unfortunately, our society doesn't really have a good grasp on basic economic fundamentals. And I kind of learned through sports cards, with everything else, because like I said, like I didn't really get a good education when I was in school, and now I'm making up for it through this website and through your channel and Brad and others.
Oh, I appreciate that. Appreciate it. I think that we are going to wrap up. We're at an hour and 33 minutes. But guys, thank you very much for joining. This was really fun. I like doing these subscriber spotlights and talking to viewership. Ryan's got an interesting background and story, perspective. And like I said, he's got his site, his blog, historythroughcards.com. Definitely check it out. It's really well done. How often do you add to that, Ryan, to that site?
So I try to add once a week.
Okay.
I have about maybe 300 and a little over 300 articles.
Okay. So yeah, you have plenty to work with, guys, on historythroughcards.com. But thanks again, man. I appreciate it. We'll have you back on, and I'm hoping to see you at the National if you're there.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be great. That'd be great. And, all right. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, sit tight, Ryan. I'm just going to end the broadcast, and we will see you again next time, guys. Thanks for joining.